Welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games, where we feed our people with relatable content and our victory condition is your satisfaction. I'm Harry, and today we have another top 10 list for you all, or I should say we have another top 5 list for you all. Today I'm going to be covering my top 5 games from within the Terrinoth universe. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, Terrinoth is a particular fantastical setting that originates in Fantasy Flight Games. Fantasy Flight are the creators of this universe, and the pioneer game of this universe is the Runebound game that was published first in 2004 by Fantasy Flight Games. And lots of the games that have come out afterwards have had that same fantastical setting applied to them. Having this universe to work with was very convenient for Fantasy Flight Games. That way they can have kind of like a Dungeons and Dragons-like universe without having to worry about things like copyright infringement. So without any further ado, let's get straight to the list. And I'm going to begin with an honorable mention, or my number 6 favorite game from within the Terranov universe. And that's this game right here, Rune Age, which is designed by Corey Konieska, and this is the one and only deck building game within this universe. And I'm a huge fan of deck building games. Deck building might be my favorite mechanism, definitely top 3. And considering that, it's a surprise that this game is ranked number 6 and not higher on this list. And the reason why is because the game in and of itself is okay. It's not the greatest thing in the world. I do enjoy the Terrinoth universe, and I do enjoy deck building, which is why I do like this game. But first of all, it's missing some of the key components or key elements that make me gravitate towards the other games in the Terrinoth line of games. First of all, it doesn't have as much variability and different modular content as far as the game's concerned, as opposed to some of these other games that you'll find higher on the list. The game does come with 4 different scenarios, so there are 4 different ways of playing this game, 4 different types of objectives and different enemy decks that players will be encountering. However, only 2 of those 4 scenarios can actually be played solo, and that is primarily the way I play this game. The game does come with 4 different races, and each of the different races has different options of cards that you can use in your deck building, because the way the game works as far as deck building concern is you have a general market of cards that are available to all players. Again, I only play solo, but if you're playing multiplayer, these cards are all available to all the players around the table. However, each particular player has their particular area with their own unique races cards that they can also draft and purchase and acquire to add to their deck and strengthen that deck. This game does, however, include some interesting deviations from the standard deck builders that I do appreciate. First of all, the fact that when you purchase cards from the market or from your own personal area, you don't get change back. So you cannot divide currency cards among different cards. You need to use, if you're going to use 2 currency cards to make a total sum, you have to only purchase 1 card with those 2 cards. You cannot use some leftover in order to purchase another card. And that was borrowed later on by a very cool deck building game. Valley of the Kings borrowed that mechanism, and I appreciate it there as well. So it's really cool. It makes you think about your decisions, because you can't just spend your money willy-nilly and get away with it because you can buy as much as you want. No, sometimes you might have to overpay for something because you really, really want that card. Tough decision. And again, I appreciate games that create these tough decisions for us to mull over and to think about. Now, another cool thing about this game is that the cards that you don't use during your turn for whatever reason are still left over in your hand for the next turn. So you can draw back up to 5 or whatever it is, and you can use these cards in the next turn. Again, really, really cool, really fun, but at the same time, somewhat limited for me as far as I'm concerned. So it's only my number 6 game in the Terrinoth universe, Rune Age. My number 5 board game within the Terrinoth universe is Battle Lore. And Battle Lore is a game within the Command & Colors line of games from Richard Borg, but it's been redesigned and re-implemented by Robert A. Kuba and Fantasy Flight Games. And basically, it takes the same core mechanisms of Command & Colors, and it applies a Terranov setting to it, where one player takes on the side of the wicked villains of Terranov, and the other player takes on the side of the heroes and the good guys of Terranov. And basically, all of the different units represent different classes, different fantastical races that are even more asymmetric from one another than the standard units from other CNC or Command & Colors type of games. So I appreciate the difference in the variety that has from that. Also, it introduces the lore system where basically there is like a consolation prize when you roll a certain die roll that's a dud. It actually has a certain symbol on it that indicates lore, which means you get lore tokens. And the lore tokens are a currency that you use in order to play your special lore cards. Because on top of having your regular command deck and command cards that you're managing as in a typical CNC game, you also have this lore deck, which you draft from time to time, and these cards are very powerful. The instructions they give you and the abilities they grant you are even more helpful than the stuff that the regular command deck allows for you. But they also come at a cost. A certain amount of lore needs to be paid. So again, as you're rolling these duds that you're frustrated with because you're trying to attack your enemy but you fail, at least you have a consolation that, you know what, I gained some lore tokens, and in the future that can help me have a very, very good and productive turn. Another really cool thing about this game is that instead of your typical victory condition as the usual Command and Colors games require for you to defeat a certain amount of units, and that's how you win the game. You defeat 4 units, you defeat 5 units, and what have you. In this game, you actually have to control specific spots on the board. There are particular spots on the board that are focus areas that if you control those spots, you have a certain amount of victory points as long as you control those spots. And as long as you control a certain amount of victory points, or a certain amount of spots, by the end of the game, you are the victor. You are the winner. So again, it even makes the winning condition very different. So I love this game because of that. I love the fact that it's a deviation from my typical CNC games, and I'm a huge fan of the Command Color games. However, I have to say that's a big caveat. Since I'm such a fan of the Command and Colors games, I find that this game, I gravitate to it more because of the mechanisms of the CNC games, and yes, of course, the deviations, which I appreciate. I find that I get this game to the table more to experience Command and Colors than I do to experience the Terrinoth universe, which is why this game is only ranked number 5. I like it a lot, but I kind of lump it up together with all the other CNC games, and I can totally see why some people, for them, Battlelore is the best of all the CNC games, and I totally respect that opinion. I'm not so sure if I'm in agreement with that opinion, but it is a fantastic iteration of that system with a fantastical setting behind it. My number 5 Terrinoth game of all time, Battlelore. And now we move on to my number 4 game within the Terrinoth universe, and for many people, it's going to be their number 1, but it's only number 4 for me, and that's Descent Journeys in the Dark 2nd edition. And again, this game is a very massively popular game. Lots of people, when I had my People's Choice rankings not too long ago, lots of people chose this as their favorite game of all time. Lots of people had this in their top 5. As for me, it's number 4. Maybe you would have asked me a year ago, I probably would have said it's number 1. First of all, lots of the people that I play this with have grown cold on it. That's first of all. Second of all, while they do have a cool app implementation of this game, the fact that this app implementation kind of has unique content, unique material to it, I actually don't mind the fact that it has unique material, but I don't appreciate the fact that you cannot play the original content that I purchased, that I invested in. I can't play it with the app. So again, I do not want to play it that way, although it does take care of the bookkeeping and it manages the overlord and makes it a fully cooperative or fully solo game. It's not worth it for me. So I do play this game from time to time with other people. I even try to play it sometimes solo by actually kind of controlling the overlord player, but to some extent creating some automata rules to it, or some automa rules to it, so it feels like it's random and it's not necessarily me making decisions to my advantage. But again, I've kind of grown cold on it. A lot of people that I play with have kind of grown cold on it. It is a fun game. I love the quest-to-quest experience and going through a campaign. As single setting scenarios are fun too. I like the fact that each of the scenarios feel different from one another, and the end game objective for each of the scenarios is different enough to make each experience feel very, very unique. I love the different characters. I love the leveling up, the going to shop, the traveling phase. A lot of things in this game I do like, but for whatever reason, it has just gone down on my list And again, on lots of the other people that I play with, it's gone down on their list as well. And of course, that's had an impact and influence on me, which is why Descent is only my number 4 game within the Terrinoth universe. My number 3 board game within the Terrinoth universe is Runebound 3rd edition. And Runebound is basically the flagship, the pioneer game of this Terrinoth universe. And Runebound 3rd edition here is the 3rd implementation of this game by Lucas Litzinger. And basically the board consists of a map of the lands of Terrinoth. And I love it. First of all, the artwork is gorgeous, it's beautiful, the color, everything just pops from this board. I love just actually navigating through this board, and it has a very cool, interesting mechanism where you're rolling a certain amount of dice according to your speed or the speed of your character, and the different faces of the die represent the different terrain types that are featured on this map. And in order to move through this map, you need to roll the terrain dice that you need to traverse these lands. So you cannot just get from point A to point B just because you want to. And again, you need to factor that in and sometimes maybe make a change of plans if you don't roll the dice that you need, or sometimes you can exert. This game has an ability which is referred to as exert, where you discard one of your skill cards from your hand of cards, and this allows you to re-roll a die. Again, you're doing this all in the efforts to get to the places that you're trying to target. And I love this game because the board has a bunch of different tokens, different color-coded tokens. You have orange, purple, and green, and these all correspond to the 3 different types of adventure decks. And the different decks, based on their color, are very focused on one particular type of encounter. So for example, the orange deck is more about combat, the green deck is more about questing or exploration, and the purple deck is more about social encounters with other NPCs, other characters in the Terrinoth universe, and usually presents you with some sort of choice and decision based on a skill test. So you got these 3 different types of encounters, and players can basically map their game around these type of encounters and say, what kind of game do I want to play this game? Do I want to have a combat heavy game where I fight lots of bad guys and gain lots of loot and go to the shop and buy more items? Or do I want to just go questing and adventuring? Or do I want to have lots of different encounters, non-combat related encounters with different creatures or beings throughout the Terrinoth universe? And again, you map your game around that. But ultimately, each game has a major quest that's taking place through the course of 2 acts. Basically 24 rounds or 24 turns are being played. And at the end of those 24 rounds or the 24 turns, you need to fight the big bad, the overlord, the bad guy, which is either Lord Margath or Vorakesh, the necromancer. And basically, those are the 2 major quests that we have in the base game. You do have other small expansions and big expansions, introduce some other bad guys and overlords you can fight, different quests. But you're trying to get powerful enough through the leveling up process by going to shop, gaining more items, by gaining lore. There's a lore token that's a currency in this game that makes you more powerful against, in particular, the overlord and the bad guy. You are trying to gain lots of gold and defeat different bad guys. You're trying to acquire different skills. You have this hand of skill cards that I mentioned earlier that not only is used for exerting, but is also used for determining skill tests. It's a really cool skill test system. It's not dice related at all. It is luck based because you do have to flip cards and draw a certain symbol, but it's not the rolling of the die, right? So I do appreciate that difference as far as the skill test is concerned. But these skills are also cards that you can play down in your player area, in your tableau, as learned skills. But in order to do that, you need to turn in a certain amount of trophies. The bad guys that you defeated earlier, based on the different colors, the orange, the green, the purple, you need to turn in a certain configuration of those trophies in order to learn these skills. And these skills are going to level you up and make you powerful. They're going to make you useful. They're going to give you benefits, advantages throughout the game, or in particular, advantages that are going to be very helpful at the end of the game when you fight the overlord, the bad guy. And those bad guys at the end of the game, they are very hard to defeat. Now, this game does play from 1 to 4 players. I prefer playing this game solo. That's how I play this game mostly. But when I do play it with other people, I never play it more than 2 people because the game is very, very long, and the downtime would be a pretty big problem, especially if you're playing at 4 players, I feel. Again, just love this game. This game really transports me to the universe, to the setting of Terrinoth. I love the narrative text that's found on all the different cards, the story cards, and the different adventure cards. And even the backstory of the different characters is something that I totally get behind. My number 3 game in the Terrinoth universe, Runebound 3rd edition. And now we move on to my number 2 board game from within the Terrinoth universe, and that is Heroes of Terranov, designed by Adam and Brady Sadler. And this game here is actually a re-implementation of Warhammer Conquest, or Warhammer Quest, I forget the name off the top of my head, which is one of the many successful and popular LCGs from the Fantasy Flight line of games that had lost its right to the Warhammer license and the Warhammer branding. Therefore, they rebranded it with what else? Their flagship universe, which is the Terrinoth universe, right? And lots of people that are fans of the Warhammer Conquest game may not be too big of fans of this one, especially because that series of games produced lots of booster packs and expansion content, while this game still to date, 2-3 years later, still has not produced a single expansion, and there is no inkling or hint that there will be an expansion for this game. But I will say this game already off the bat comes with 8 different scenarios that you can partake in. And you can kind of creatively weave them together to form a campaign, although the rule book does not necessarily do so. But this game is really, really cool because basically you have 4 different types of action cards that are available on your tableau. And those 4 action cards are how you choose your actions each round. I think you can take 2 actions each round, and you simply tap them to indicate that they have been exhausted, that they have been used, and that you cannot use them again, not only for that round, but you can't use them that way until they are refreshed. And you just don't refresh them at the end of the turn. You need to take a particular action within your 4 actions in order to refresh these. And basically, you're fighting all these different bad guys. And sometimes the bad guys are in your player area. They're encountering you, or they're encountering your opponent or your teammate. This is a fully cooperative game, by the way. They're encountering your teammate, or they can be lurking in the shadows. And if they're lurking in the shadows or in the forest or whatever it is, you might not be able to attack them, right? You're going to need very particular actions in order to attack them, but they still might be able to attack you, especially if they have like ranged weapons or what have you. And again, just the manipulating of those 4 different action cards and choosing them as wisely as possible. And I love the fact that each scenario takes place in like 3 acts, and from act to act, you can make some leveling up decisions. You can upgrade some of those 4 basic cards that you start with to have a more advanced version of those cards. And each of those cards is related to different things. It's related to the actual travel, or maybe it's related to combat and attacking. It might be related to healing, or it might be related to helping your teammate out. And again, you're mapping all that out as well as possible. This game comes with tons of different characters that each have their own unique special abilities. Lots of characters that people who are familiar with the Terrinoth universe will be very happy to see. Characters that have been used in other iterations of other Terrinoth content. You're going to see them here. They make up an appearance once again. And again, just because it doesn't have enough expansion content is not enough, at least for now, to knock this game down for me. Because again, I feel that the base game comes with a good enough variety of characters, of quests, of bad guys, of overlords, of monsters. Just enough variety to keep me satisfied. And again, the gameplay itself for me is so satisfying. I'm a big fan of these LCG style games that Fantasy Flight has produced. I never played Warhammer Conquest or Warhammer Quest, but I'm sure I would have liked it as well. But again, I am a fan of the Terrinoth universe, so that already helps me gravitate towards this game, perhaps more than somebody else who's not a fan of the Terrinoth universe would. My number 2 board game within the Terrinoth universe, Heroes of Terranov. The name is right there, Terranov. And that's it, folks. We're going to get to my number 1 board game of all time from within the Terranov universe. If you've been following this channel for a while, this game is not going to be a surprise to you. And chances are you're going to be very upset with me because you're going to think that I'm cheating. Because my number 1 is Runebound 2nd Edition. Yes, Runebound 3rd Edition was my number 3, but Runebound 2nd Edition is my number 1. And I love Runebound 3rd Edition, let me let you know. But Runebound 2nd Edition, there's just something about it. First of all, it has all the things that I like about Runebound 3rd Edition were kind of innovated here in Runebound 2nd Edition, which is the travel mechanism on the board. You have the board with the different terrain types. You have the dice that you're rolling, where the different sides of the die correspond with the different terrain types, and you need to roll the particular terrain types of the lands that you're trying to traverse and pass through in order to get from point A to point B. So you've got that mechanism. You've got the different color-coded tokens. However, the difference between the color-coded tokens here and the color-coded tokens in Runebound 3rd edition is that in 3rd edition, the colors refer to the different types of encounters that you're going to take. Combat, exploration, or social. Here, the different colors, they do not represent different types of encounters. Here, instead, the different colors represent the levels of difficulty, right? So green would be the easiest, lowest level type of encounters, while red would be the hardest, most difficult type of encounters. So you know, based on the power of your character, of your band of heroes, you know that certain quests are not going to be a good idea for you to explore. You're going to probably want to stay at a certain range depending on how powerful you are as a character, or again, as your party is, because this game does, each player does basically have a party of heroes because you start with just your main character. But as the game goes along, you go to the different cities and you recruit allies. And I love the idea of allies, which again, is not something that's found in Runebound 3rd edition. So that's a deviation that I appreciate and really welcome. The idea that you have these different ally characters that you get to know, that you get to invest in, and will also help you in your combat going forward and make you very successful, because whatever areas you might be weak in, they might cover your vulnerabilities because they might be strong in those areas. You're also going to the shop to acquire different items and different weapons. And this game has a very cool leveling up system where every time you successfully accomplish one of these encounters, you get a certain amount of experience points according to its difficulty. You can get anywhere from 1 to 4 experience points. And every time you have 5 experience points to turn in, you could turn them in to level up your character in one particular stat. You can level up their health, or you can level up their mind, or their body, or their spirit attributes. And again, these things are all going to make them more powerful and more successful going forward. And I love the combat because every time you engage in combat, first of all, you go through a series of 3 different types of combats. First, you partake in ranged combat, then you partake in melee combat, and then finally you partake in magic combat. And your hero can actually only attack in one of those 3 areas. He or she cannot attack in all 3. They can defend in 2 of the others, but they can only attack in 1. And each combat round, you're making the choice of which one of those 3 is more likely or the best choice for you to attack with your hero. And you're rolling a certain amount of dice, and you're adding the modifiers of your hero's relevant stats, plus any other modifiers that their weapons or their equipment might add to them, and you're comparing it to a particular number on the enemy's card. And if it equals or surpasses that total, then you have hit that enemy, and you deal the amount of damage that your hero card tells you to. While the combat in Runebound 3rd edition is very thoughtful and methodical, I do not like the experience of casting the tokens. For whatever reason, it was not very satisfying for me, from a tactile experience. And also, I just didn't like the 50-50 nature of it all, because there's a 50% chance that I'm going to cast the token and it's not going to give me the symbol that I want. And there are ways of manipulating that in Runebound 3rd edition. You have the winged, little wing symbols that allow you to flip or recast tokens. But again, it just, for whatever reason, it just didn't click with me. And the Runebound 2nd edition combat system, really like it. All the way from the different allies, as long as you have 2 different allies, you can actually attack the enemy in all 3 different battle types, battlegrounds. You can attack melee, you can attack range, and you can attack magic as long as you have 2 allies. So it really makes you work towards getting those allies. Again, just really cool, really neat system. Love the game. Love the fact that the 2nd edition has so much content, and I've been able and very lucky to find all the big box expansions. At this point, I own all the big box expansions for a very good price, used albeit. But again, the fact that this game has much more content than Runebound 3rd edition adds to the appeal for me and the replayability. My number 1 board game from the Terranov universe, Runebound 2nd edition. And that's it for today's list, folks. Thank you so much for joining us here when Harry Met Board Games. If you're a fan of the Terrinoth universe, how about you comment down below and tell me what's your favorite game within that line of games. This is Harry saying take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.